On that first Easter, the women walked to the tomb, to the place where the body of Jesus had been laid after his death. That's what we do. Someone dies, we bury their body or their ashes, and the women were just doing what we do. And the women had every reason to believe that when they arrived at the tomb that morning, they would find the body of Jesus, and they would take out their spices and the oils and anoint his body for the final burial. But we know the rest of the story. The women come to the tomb and they find it empty. There's no body there, just the cloths that the body of Jesus had been wrapped in. And there's two guys in dazzling white asking them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here. He has arisen." The women are terrified. And of course, we would be terrified too. They understood death. We understand death. But empty tombs, resurrection, new life, people being alive, that is more difficult to comprehend. And yet, the women overcame whatever disbelief they had, and they go to tell the disciples that they found an empty tomb, and the disciples do not believe them. They thought it was an idle tale, that the women were making it up. You know, you should never listen to hysterical women, right? They should not be believed. And yet, this should not have been surprising at all, because if anyone had been listening, including the disciples, Jesus has been telling them all along that the message of God's love cannot be stopped, that the powers of chaos and death could try and silence God's message of love for all, but even then Jesus said the stones would shout. He's been telling them all along that they could kill his body, but he was going to rise again, and that good news would be continued. Why is it that resurrection is so easy to dismiss? You and I have been at the graveside too, as we have buried our loved ones and cannot imagine living without them. And yet, do we not hear their voices of encouragement and love and care in our hearts? Do we not taste their love when we make a favorite recipe from our mother or from our grandmother? Do we not feel our father or our grandfather's hands on our hands as we cut that piece of wood or as we plant that garden? We may see an empty place at the dinner table this Easter, but we know that the spirit and life and love of our loved ones is with us. It's not the same, I know, as having their physical presence standing next to us, embracing us, laughing with us. And I'm sure the women missed Jesus being with them in that way, and yet he was alive to them. His life would go on. Jesus' love, Jesus' teachings, Jesus' courage would continue in the lives of the people who followed him. Jesus goes ahead of the women and the disciples, and Jesus goes ahead of us now. Jesus is alive in each one of us who follows him, in each one of us who proclaims good news to the poor and release to those held in captivity. We do not need to go searching for Jesus in the graveyard because he's not there. He's here. He's here and is among us. He lives, just like our loved ones live. Why do we linger at the gravesite? The two men asked that question. Why do you seek the living among the dead? I wonder how many times we seek the dead among the living. We may go to visit the place where our loved ones have been buried or laid to rest, but we don't stay there. We go forward. We move ahead, carrying their love, their memory, their stories, all they gave us. Like Jesus, they are alive in our hearts as promised, and there's nothing in all of creation that can separate us from God's love or the love that we have for one another. Nothing. Not death, nothing. So why do we want to cling to death instead of trusting that there is a possibility of new life? Jesus was different after he rose. Life is different after we say goodbye to the ones we love. But staying at the gravesite rather than moving into the future is living with the dead among the living. We spend a lot of time, do we not, trying to preserve that which is dead and gone. Attitudes and behaviors that create destruction and broken relationships. You and I live with that dead in the midst of our living every day, and the frustration and the anger that results from us not being willing to see life differently or living differently. How often do we look for the living among the dead instead of creatively living into faith that God can do a new thing? Can you believe that Jesus is alive? Do you believe that new life is just an idle tale? You here, or those of you watching online, our presence here today, even if we're not sure, says there's an inkling inside of us that wants to know, that wants to believe, that wants to hear that we can be a new creation, that new life is possible. But we've got to be like the women. We've got to be witnesses to that. We've got to tell the story so that others know that we can live, that we can live. And so I invite you to think about the ways in which you have experienced that resurrection power. Where have you seen that new life where it seemed like everything was dead and gone? The witness of the women was that they proclaimed what they saw, what they heard, and what they remembered, and they were unafraid to speak their truth. The men did not stop them from telling their story or their truth. They believed, and they spoke up, and they spoke out loud. How will we be witnesses to that resurrection this year? How will we proclaim that Jesus Christ is risen today, tomorrow, and will live on in the days ahead? Thanks be to God. Amen.